I was asked to go last. Partly because of the adult nature of what I'm about to read. So, I apologise for the swearing. And the violence and the sex. Actually, there's not much sex, but there's a lot of violence and swearing. The problem with going last is that you probably had too many drinks before reading, which I have. But that kind of suits the novel. I'm going to read you two sections from my novel, Entertaining Strangers. Both of which are based on true stories. Even though the novel is fictional, both of them are based on true stories. And I'm going to read you the opening first, which is based on a story which I've told to many people, which when I was young and foolish, which of course is many, many years ago, I happened to have a few too many drinks one night, and I was walking through Loughborough, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. And it was about 1 in the morning, and I turned around, and there was a homeless woman who said to me, "Have you got any kebabs on you?" And I said, "No, I don't like kebabs, but I've got lots of food in the freezer, so why don't you come back to our house and eat our freezer?" Which she did. And she came back to our house, and she ate. I fried everything in the freezer and the fridge, including pies. You can actually fry pies. And she ate it all, and at that point I was living with a guy who was meant to be here tonight because he's a guest of honour really. But typically, because he's an anarchist, he's not turned up. And he was a guy who was obsessed with ants. And he infected everyone with this obsession. And he just talked endlessly about ants. And he came downstairs whilst I was frying the food for this woman, and I said to him, "Oh, it's not what you think. It's not what you think." And he said, "I wasn't thinking anything. I was just thinking about ants." And he proceeded to talk to her for hours and hours and hours about ants, whilst we drank all the vermouth in the house and so on, and all the gin and all the vodka and all the whiskey, etc., etc. And next morning, she kissed us both on the cheek and said goodbye. I now believe in English gentlemen again, which is kind of the nicest thing almost anyone's ever said to me. So if you want to compliment me afterwards, do that. But the novel is based, in part, fictionalised version of her. She's the narrator of the novel, and of a very heavily fictionalised version of my very close friend and housemate at the time, the guy who was obsessed with ants, the anarchist who was obsessed with ants. There was obviously something very traumatic in her past which had brought her to this point, and had made her homeless. And she was starving. I mean, she hadn't eaten for 8 days. She asked to listen to music on the stereo, and I asked to listen to a very strange piano piece by Edward Elgar called In Smyrna. And we played it, and she said, "When I was young, I used to play that on the piano." So this first chapter is about that, a sort of very, very heavily fictionalised version of that first meeting. One exhausting and exhausted night, I found out afterwards it was the year 1997. I'd sat down for a minute on a dog-piss-soaked doorstep, in a dog-piss street, in a dog-piss town, when the door I was leaning against gave behind me. Not being at my most alert after the gin I'd scavenged from various bins, I fell backwards into darkness, hitting my head on a door frame. "Fuck," I said. Then straight away I shushed myself, praying I hadn't woken anyone up. Though at that moment I felt unsure that there was anyone in the door, or house, or world who was wake-upable. I got up and peered inside the doorway. I couldn't see anyone or anything. except a mess of free newspapers and unopened letters. Nothing I saw or heard alerted me to how strange life inside the house was going to turn out. There were no alarm bells, literal or otherwise. So I stepped inside. At least it'd be a little bit warmer here, a bit less rainy. That was all I was telling myself. Well, apart from the second fuck, when I slipped on a Tupperware catalogue and skated across the hall. The skating ended when I hit a shoe rack, and half a dozen of empty wine bottles, masquerading as shoes, fell on top of me. Fuck, I said, and straight away shushed myself and the bottles in case someone was about. Covered in bottles and newspapers, I reckoned I might bed down for the night without anyone noticing and leave early next morning. I felt I was drowning outside in rain and dog piss, but here it was warmer, drier. Even if someone were upstairs, they might not find me. I just had to keep the sound of fucks, breaking bottles, headbanging, and newspaper skating to a minimum. Better still, there in front of me was the sitting room and an old sofa, like the lost memory of a mangy but comfy dog I'd snuggled up to in a different city, a past life. With that half memory, the sofa suddenly seemed to zoom off to a far horizon as I stood up and staggered in its direction. I lunged out for it and fell over an unseen coffee table. Piles of books thumped on the floor, half-empty glasses fell and shattered, and one of the table legs broke. Fuck! I shouted, holding my knee and hopping round the room. I stepped in a cold plate of chilli, which stuck to my shoe, and hit a TV, knocking it off its stand into the waste paper bin. Bastard shit bollocks! I said, for a change, thinking the mangy dog sofa was laughing at me as it zoomed back from the horizon into view. Catching it unawares, I leapt for it. Having finally attained sofadom, the TV switched itself on and a Hammer horror started in the waste paper basket. Fuck, 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 I said, and straight away, shh, both myself and the television, by kicking the plate of chili at it from my shoe. Fuck, I said. I hope no one heard those last fucks. And with that, exhausted, so exhausted, I let myself sink into the dog-like sofa, swallowed by the huge mouth at the back, letting its yawns close round me, letting those mangy dog memories take me back to a different city, a different life. Oh, hello. There was a darker dark in the room. All I could make out was the pom-pommed outline of a long satin dressing gown. A woman's dressing gown worn by a man's voice. Two elements united only insofar as they issued from the same dark, dark place in the room, and both smelled of fags. The dressing gown said, "Oh, hello," in a voice like Radio 4. I was going to say fuck and sorry and dash past the dressing gown into the street before he or she started screaming, hitting me, ringing the police. The street suddenly seemed such a long way away, out of the sofa, past the dressing gown, over the chilli, round the coffee table and TV, skating down the hallway. Such a long way away. Perhaps instead I might disappear down the back of a dog sofa, ingested forever with the lost coins, sweet wrappers and fluff. But no, it was no good. Sink as I might, I couldn't get down far enough for the dressing gown not to see me, the Radio 4 voice not to find me. Surrendering to the inevitable, I started prizing myself out of the sofa's drawers, when the dressing gown suddenly announced, "Ants." I said, "You what?" The dressing gown said, "Ants! They're everywhere, you know." I said, "Oh," and looked around me. This book, for example, full of them. I peered through the darkness at the book he or she was waving, but it looked insect-free to me, so I just said, "Oh." Yes, every book I read is full of them, even when they're not. How can a book be full of ants when it's not? Ah, that is the question. That is the question, to paraphrase another ant-ridden book. Hamlet's not full of ants. Yes, it is. No, it bloody well isn't. I was getting exasperated. Not being practised in these situations, I wasn't sure what kind of argument a surprised intruder and a resident of a house should be having, but this certainly wasn't it. There were ants in the first performance, and they featured in the play ever since. For Christ's sake. Look, he said, sounding like some walking textbook, there are quadrillion ants in the world, which means an average of 5 ants per square yard, give or take. The stage at the Globe Theatre was about 100 square yards, maybe more, maybe less, no one really knows. So there must have been at least a few hundred on stage back in 1602. Maybe some of them joined in the final death scene, tragically squashed underfoot as the first Hamlet was poisoned. Theirs was not mere play acting. They died for their art. So that's the opening of a novel. And that's the first non-fictional image that the book is based on. The second non-fictional image, and I'm not going to say here how these two non-fictional images are linked, because that would ruin the novel, and you've got to buy it to find that out, is based far back, because the main book of the novel is based in 1997, but it flashes back eventually to 1922. In 1922 was the Great Fire of Smyrna. And to sketch out the history here, in 1919, in the wake of the First World War, Greece was given permission by the superpowers, including Great Britain, to annex Smyrna and the surrounding areas. And Smyrna is sort of the old sort of name for the modern city of Izmir in Turkey. And in the wake of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire, which is now Turkey, was falling to pieces, and Greece, as I say, was given permission to annex part of modern Turkey. What followed was the invasion by the Greeks. They took over Smyrna, like I say, now Izmir, and then invaded large swathes of the area that was then called Anatolia in the Ottoman Empire. And eventually, in 1922, the resurgent Turks, the Turkish nationalist movement, under their famous leader Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal, defeated the Greeks and pushed them back towards the Mediterranean. The Greek army, which had committed some terrible atrocities during this invasion, fled and abandoned the city, sailed away, abandoned the city of Smyrna, arguably, and this is very arguably, and I would probably get in trouble for saying this, but arguably the Turkish army burnt down the city of Smyrna, and 500,000 refugees, Greeks and Armenians and other people gathered on the quay of Smyrna. And there were this huge port, still is, Izmir, but Smyrna was a huge port, and there were 25, 30 foreign warships, cruisers, battleships in the harbour at that time. But in the first part of the disaster, where all of these people were gathered on the quay and the city was burning to the ground, the British and various other of the superpowers had strict orders not to take any of the refugees who weren't British or that particular nationality on board. So the Greeks and the Armenians were massacred whilst the British and the other warships stood by. And literally, some of the British warships were playing gramophone records to drown out the screaming, and moreover pouring boiling water on the refugees who were swimming up to them screaming for help. So this chapter, which is rather more serious than the last, is based in 1922 and is about one Armenian girl's experience of the Great Fire of Smyrna. And I'm going to read you the section towards the end of the chapter. She runs past burning houses and burning shops and burning people and burning everything. She runs past sights and sounds and odours she will not see, hear or smell, cannot think about. Instead, she thinks about the colourful flags, the flags which seem to be everywhere. French flags, American flags, British flags, crescent and star flags, the tatty sheets hanging over shop awnings, declaring Islam or Musevi Jewish, the flags which are talismans against war, fire and murder, the flags which are failed talismans because they are already burning. She runs down Frank Street where most flags are still waving, not burning. She runs down Frank Street towards the sea in the direction the flags are waving, in the direction of the wind, in the direction of the spreading fire. She runs down Frank Street and finally onto the quay. The quay is a chaos. The quay is a chaos of screaming and burning. Soon, within a few hours, it will be a chaos of 500,000 people, trampled animals and lost possessions, upturned sacks of raisins and figs and pulses, Armenians and Franks and Levantines and Greek buyers, and people who didn't know they were any different to anyone else till now, all of them crushed into one fiery sunset. There will be fire on one side, fire hemorrhaging heat, fire hemorrhaging black smoke, fire 2 miles long and as high as Mount Pegasus, fire engulfing an amphitheatre of 30,000 homes, dried fruit warehouses, trading houses, the American consulate, the Swedish consulate, the Carpet Oriental, the Sporting Club, the Grand Hotel Kramer Palace, Passport, the Teatro de Smyrna, and the black letters over its arched doorway, advertising the last movie to be shown there, La Tango de la Mort. On another side there will be sea-reflecting fire, a harbour full of corpses and body parts, and lads swimming between them, slipping watches and wallets from the dead, a harbour full of scuppered yawls and kikes, and paddles that have been broken to prevent escape to the moored merchant ships, cruisers and warships, and scuppered lighters which carry British, French, American citizens, but no one else to safety, 21 foreign ships, 11 British, 5 French, 1 Italian, the French battleships Jean Bart, Ernest Renan, Waldeck Rousseau, the British super dreadnought Iron Duke, the King George V, Serapis, Cardiff, Tumult, the Hospital Talia, the American Litchfield, the Winona, Hog Island, the Ed Saul, the Sardegna, the Bavarian, which will not get involved, will not intervene, will not help, and many of which, come dusk, will move another 250 yards from the quay to escape the heat. But even from 800 yards away, the girl on the quay will still hear the music played on decks, music from the military bands and the gramophone records, which are there to drown out the 500,000 screams. On all sides there will be screams of Guy Master, we're burning!" as volcanic like ash will pour down on the heads of the refugees, and chetters will douse them with benzine and set them alight, and rape women on the burning cobbles, and slice off their breasts and throw them in the sea, and herd the young men off to the Konak to be shot, towards the Geddes River near Manisa, or the Puna Basha in the Neneman interior, never to be seen again, and cut off noses and bayonet others, telling them that they will finally see Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and shouting, "Haida, Haida, begone!" as they push, shove and whittle the 500,000 strong crowd on the quay, spreading out 2 miles towards Punta, and the crowd will shout, scream for the ships in the harbour to help, or at least to shine their spotlights on them, because the worst things are happening in the shadows, and everyone in the crowd will push and crush not to be in the shadows, on the edges, where the sea flames bayonets, benzine and machine gun posts are, and the press will become so dense, 15, 20 deep in places, that the sick balance on the shoulders of the well, the dead remain standing next to the living, and someone will be wailing a long ago, far away song called Vokst and Apka in the girl's ear. Hunter, alone in the hills, have you seen my son, my boy, my little dear? Yes, I saw him early, heading for a wedding feast. On his heart, a red poppy I saw. Tell me, Hunter, who is she who took my son away? Where does he lie wed with her? Your son lies on a stone, struck down. To a bullet he is wed, not with a doe he lies. The swallows fly high, the clouds like a mist. Quietly the grass whispers over your boy so dear. And this folk lament will weave its Armenian harmonies into a chaotic apocalyptic fugue full of strange dissonances and unexpected consonances never heard before or since, with a distant gramophone record of Caruso singing Carmen on one ship, the overture from Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream on another, the nearby 500,000 screams, the yells of Haida, Haida, the crunching of flames eating the flesh off buildings, and the unheard whimpering of a girl who will feel she has been divided into two halves, one facing west and the cold breeze from the sea, one facing east and the terrific heat of 100 feet flames, which are scorching her skin off so she cannot bear it anymore, and she will have to turn round like meat on a grill to cook the other side instead, and then she will have to turn again, and the gaps between turning get shorter and shorter as the night wears on, and the old woman who has been singing Vokst and Apka will pass out, and the girl will hold her up so she is not trampled.